Good morning. Thank you for joining us. President Zelensky is meeting with Rishi Sunak as we speak at the Prime Minister's country residence, Chequers.
Pretty dramatic stuff. He flew in by helicopter, dressed, of course, in his trademark military fatigues. The Prime Minister hugged the man who's called him his friend. But they're discussing now what the UK may do to support Ukraine in their war with Russia. More arms, which means more taxpayer support for Ukraine. That's right. So joining us now for the latest on this is MP for Halton Price and Howden, David Davis. Good morning.
Morning.
Nice to see you. We've been debating this so far since 9:30 this morning as to whether this plays well with the voters. Normally, if we support a war, people are on side in this country because this is what we do on the global stage. We are good at this. However, we have massive taxes. We have very little money left to run our services at the moment, and people are feeling it in their pocket. We're going to be fatigued by this, are we not?
Right. Just think of the alternative for a second, the so-called counterfactual. If we don't support him, Putin will win. Will our taxes go up or down in the future? Will we have to spend more money on defence or less?
What happens if Putin loses?
If Putin loses, I suspect Putin will be deposed in Russia. That's the most likely outcome. But all of the futures are very difficult to predict. But what we can't afford, look, Putin had Chechnya, we ignored it. Georgia, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, we ignored it. Crimea, we ignored it. Syria, we ignored it. If you let an autocrat go on winning wars, we've done this before in the 1930s. Something eventually goes horribly wrong, and that's what we've got to stop. And Ukraine, thank heavens, has come before we got.
And if Ukraine hadn't had support from countries like, well, all of Europe, Britain in particular, I suspect the war would already be lost. Victory in Ukraine would have been in a matter of weeks.
It would have been over in months. I mean, they're very fiercely independent people, and they would have fought hard, but it wouldn't have been where it is now.
And then where would he go? One of the Baltic states?
Well, you've got the Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, possibles, or pressure, or a whole series of things would have come to play. And he would have had yet another victory under his belt. And the Russian people would think, well, we've got a leader who can win. You don't want that. The West, in fact, the whole world doesn't. I doubt even China wants that, really.
What does victory for Ukraine look like, David?
Well, the answer to that is in President Zelensky's head, I suspect, rather than what we think. I mean, ideally, they'd like to get Donbass and Crimea back. I don't think that's going to happen. They might get some of the Donbass back, but at the very least, it's the borders that existed on the day he sent that tank column towards Kiev. And that's a de minimis position. And if that's happened and that's cost Russia 100,000 lives, it's brutal arithmetic of these things. If it's cost Russia 100,000 lives, that's definitely a loss for Russia. And I wouldn't call it a victory for Ukraine, but at least an acceptable outcome.
Interesting last week, Germany, which has been always very reluctant to get involved in foreign conflicts because of their own conduct in the Second World War.
Constitutional limits on it that we put in.
Exactly. But they pledged billions of pounds extra in aid last week.
Yeah.
And that's quite significant.
Well, and because they're closer than we are.
Yeah.
I mean, the point is, the closer you are to the Russian border, the more sensitive you are to this whole thing. The Russian or Belarusian border.
And Poland, very close.
Poland would have been one of the countries that. I mean, bear in mind, if you want to look at Putin's ambitions, just look at the map of the old Russian empires or the old Soviet empires. Every Eastern European country is in his sights. Of course they're very determined to make sure he doesn't get past Ukraine.
Our very own Liam Halligan has just written an article actually about how this military conflict is. We are taking a harder hit on this in Europe from an economy point of view than the US. So that the US economy is going to grow by 1.6% this year, according to the IMF, who can be pessimistic, admittedly. And the Eurozone GDP is looking like it's half of that, with Germany heading for recession now, the UK shrinking. This war isn't terrible for Biden and America in the same way that it is for us.
No. It's a repeat of history again. I mean, Europe always pays the price.
So is there an incentive for Biden to end? Is there an incentive for it to come to an end?
Look, there's less pressure at one level, economically, there's less pressure on Biden. Look, The US is a much more independent country in terms of international trade. It's got its own oil supply, it's got its own minerals and so on. Trade is, although it's huge, trade is a smaller fraction for it than it is for us. But the Americans have got to think very, very hard about what the future structure of the world looks like, right? They've got a big problem with China, which frankly, I don't think they're being very brave about, but that's another issue. But the last thing they want is further Russian successes. I mean, they had to face up to the facts in Syria that we basically lost, even though we were all committed there. So the economics, of course, doesn't hurt America as badly as it hurts us because it's less close to their doorstep. But America sees itself as the guardian of democracy.
But they also have their own fuel. I was just going to say, America also they have their own fuel supplies in a way that we don't.
Frack.
They frack.
Oh, look, at every. I mean, listen, if the rest of the world vanished, America could get by. I mean, that won't happen, but that's the truth.
We're going to talk about immigration, David, in a moment. David, on the front page of the Daily Telegraph today, Braverman, the Home Secretary, pushes PM to deliver on migrants. She's making a major speech today at a think tank. Michael Gove's going to be there too, effectively challenging the Prime Minister to sort legal migration out, which we think is going to reach 700,000 when the figures are published later this month. I thought the target in the Tory manifesto, tens of thousands. What's your response?
Andrew, can you help me here?
Right.
I mean, a question for you. Which department runs migration?
It's funny you should mention that because it is the Home Office, which is run by Suella Braverman and Priti Patel, who is also putting the boot in about immigration. She was Home Secretary before too.
Yeah, I mean, this is the wonderful irony of this. You've got the person actually responsible for it. Now, let's just sort of cut it into bits, this problem. Number one, Brexit was partly about migration.
Yeah.
It was about our control of our own migration. It was about not having uncontrolled migration. We've got that now, OK? So every person, apart from the boat people, every person coming here legally comes because we've agreed it.
Yes.
And guess what? It's a committee run by the Home Secretary that decides on that. So what on earth's going on there? Now, we're going to have numbers, if they're not out already, which get us close to about 1 million this year, which is huge, and it creates problems for the country. Let's not...
NHS, schools, housing.
Housing.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had an increase in population of about 10 million over the last couple of decades, you know, and the houses haven't gone up by that much. So clearly there are problems. The other side of the coin, post-COVID, all those people who've sort of early retired and so on, the agricultural industry still demanding more, and so on. So clearly we've got a transition to carry out. But it's not done by headlines like this. It's done by good, hard work and deciding, right, we've got to have a training programme here, we've got an incentive programme there, and so on. And the government's actually doing that.
But this is about a Home Secretary who, what she's really doing, isn't she? She's manoeuvring. Politically manoeuvring in the event. This is about her standing with Tory MPs and Tory party members in the country because she's very ambitious. She wants to be the next Tory leader.
Well, look, let me put it in bald facts. If we win the next election, Rishi Sunak will be there. But if we do, I think it's about 1 in 3 chance.
Okay.
And I think it splits evenly between Labour victory, Tory victory, or hung Parliament. That's basically, and the next year is going to dictate that. And the only condition under which people like Braverman and others will be running for leadership is if we lose, not if we win. Now, a lot of young MPs say to me, David, is this 92 or is this 97? And I say to them, that's up to you. Because in 92 we pulled together and we won. We overwhelmed. We were supposed to lose. People were saying what you just said to me now, you're not going to win. But we won against the odds, right? Because we all pulled together. 97, we all started attacking each other, like that front page. And guess what happened?
Massacre.
Massacre. And that's my lesson from that, really. Of course we've got to solve this problem, but it's more than one person to solve it, of course, but she's got the lead position.
Are we letting too many in?
I think my hunch will be yes, because just on the housing front alone, there'll be young people, so they won't have much immediate demand on healthcare. They may have demand on And there are things we should be doing. I mean, people have talked about why on earth, and I agree, why on earth are people coming to study a master's degree able to bring their family with them? They shouldn't. That's silly. Somebody's made a concession in some deal or other at some point, and they shouldn't have made the concession. So we can reverse that. So we can trim things like that. But at the end of the day, you know, we've got to make the economy run, not by doing what Gordon Brown did, which is bring in loads of cheap labour. You know, that and I would have to analyse that million people and say, all right, how much of this is cheap labour? Because I want to get rid of that.
Because there are farmers obviously complaining that one of the reasons our food prices are so high, there's vegetables rotting in fields that British people just won't go and pick. How do we incentivise young British people? There's lots of jobs available who don't want to go back to work to go and pick those strawberries.
Well, it'd be the devil's own job, is what I'll say to you, because you know, people don't want to do those jobs. You know, we had this discussion in Cabinet many years ago. Theresa May was talking about how she had talked to one of her strawberry farmers, and she said, "Well, what will you do if you can't get this labour?" He said, "Well, I have to automate." Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. You have to invest.
Yes.
You know, so that's one of the dimensions. You know, you can't. You know, in one sense, people who say you can't rely on cheap labour is dead right, but there are ways to deal with that.
Yes.
There are ways to deal with that in which we deliver better jobs for Brits. When we were doing the referendum campaign, the one statement stuck in my mind. It was a man who ran a painting and decorating company. He was working in my house. He comes from West Yorkshire. And he said he's in favour of Brexit. I said, why? He said, immigration, Mr Davis. And I thought, oh, here we go. So I said, what, don't you like foreigners? He said, oh, no. He said, if I were a Romanian or I were a Pole, I'd be here earning 3 times as much money and sending it home. It's good on them. He said, but bad on you. He said, you know why? Because I haven't had a pay increase for 10 years. And if I didn't give him a job, my son wouldn't have one. So that's what we've got to fix, you know? And we can do that. There are ways of training, investment, encouragement back into work, all those things. But we don't need to do it as a fight on it. We need to do it as a discussion in a Cabinet committee.
Not a fight on the front pages.
Exactly.